Every morning, he stood at the same corner, waving at the roaring motorcycles that passed by his small house. It was a simple gesture, a friendly smile to strangers who probably didn't even know his name. But one day, the motorcycles stopped, and what happened next would shake this man's life to its core, revealing a story of loneliness, community, and a twist so unexpected that it would make headlines across the nation. What started as a daily routine transformed into something that no one, especially him, could have ever imagined. This is a story about connection, about how the smallest acts can create the biggest impacts, and about a secret that would change everything. Robert Mitchell was 73 years old when his entire world revolved around 7:45 in the morning. That was the time when the first wave of motorcycles would thunder down Maple Street, the quiet residential road where he'd lived for 42 years. Every single morning, without fail, Robert would step out onto his front porch, coffee mug in hand, and wave. The neighbors thought it was strange. Mrs. Patterson from next door told her book club that poor Robert had lost his mind after Margaret died. The Johnsons across the street whispered that grief had made him eccentric. But Robert didn't care what they thought. Those few minutes every morning, standing on his porch, watching the parade of chrome and leather roar past his house, were the only moments he felt truly alive. Maple Street had become unexpectedly popular with the local motorcycle community about 5 years ago. The road offered a perfect shortcut to the mountain highways, where riders could open up their engines and feel the wind without the constraints of city traffic. At first, when the noise started, neighbors complained. They wanted the city to put up signs, to ban the bikes, to restore their quiet mornings. But not Robert. Robert had embraced it. His life hadn't always been this small. Robert Mitchell had been a high school principal for 31 years. He'd managed budgets, counseled troubled teenagers, hired and fired teachers, and presided over countless graduations. He'd been respected, even feared by some. People listened when he spoke. His calendar had been packed with meetings, events, and responsibilities. Then he retired at 65, planning to spend his golden years traveling with Margaret, his wife of 47 years. They'd managed one cruise to Alaska, just one. 6 months after retirement, Margaret was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. She was gone within 8 months. The house became a mausoleum. Their 2 children, David and Sarah, lived on opposite coasts. David was a corporate lawyer in Seattle, always too busy. Sarah taught at a university in North Carolina, wrapped up in her academic career and her own family. They called weekly, visited on major holidays, and worried about their father from a distance. But they didn't understand. They couldn't understand what it felt like to wake up every morning in a bed that was too big, in a house that echoed with 47 years of memories, with absolutely nothing to do and no one to talk to. The depression had hit hard that first year. Robert stopped shaving regularly, stopped cooking real meals. Some days he didn't get dressed at all. The doctor prescribed antidepressants, but they made him feel numb, disconnected. He stopped taking them after 3 months. He needed to feel something, even if that something was pain. Then one morning, about 3 years after Margaret's death, Robert had been sitting on his porch with his coffee, staring at nothing, when the first motorcycle rumbled past. On impulse, barely conscious of what he was doing, he'd raised his hand and waved. The rider, surprised, had honked back. That tiny interaction, that split second of acknowledgement from another human being, had sent a jolt through Robert's system. He felt seen. He felt present in the world. The next morning, he'd done it again, and again. Soon it became ritual. He'd wake up at 7:15, shower, dress in clean clothes, make his coffee exactly the way Margaret used to make it, and position himself on the porch by 7:40. Some riders ignored him, most waved back, a few honked. It wasn't much, but it was enough. It gave structure to his days. It gave him a reason to get up, to be presentable, to engage with the living world, even if only for 15 minutes. His children didn't understand. During their phone calls, when he mentioned the motorcycles, they changed the subject quickly, uncomfortable. Sarah had suggested during her last visit that maybe he should consider moving to a retirement community, somewhere with activities and people his own age. Robert had politely declined. She didn't understand that he didn't want activities. He didn't want forced socialization with other lonely seniors. He just wanted his waves, his motorcycles, his 15 minutes of mattering. The porch became his stage. He learned to recognize some of the regular riders. There was a large man on a Harley who always gave him a thumbs up, a group of 3 younger guys on sport bikes who would rev their engines playfully as they passed, an older couple on a gold touring bike who waved with enthusiasm. But his favorite was the woman on the red Ducati. She'd started appearing about 6 months ago, always riding solo, always in that distinctive red leather jacket. At first, she'd just nodded at him. Then she'd started waving, then honking. Last month, she'd slowed down slightly and saluted him military style as she passed. That small escalation of recognition had made Robert's entire week. He'd found himself looking forward to her appearance specifically, wondering who she was, where she was going, what her story might be. Mrs. Patterson had noticed. Of course she had. She'd made a snide comment about Robert and his girlfriend on the motorcycle. Robert had laughed it off, but privately he'd been embarrassed. He wasn't some foolish old man developing a crush on a stranger. He just appreciated her consistency, her acknowledgement of his existence. That wasn't pathetic. It was human connection. That's what he told himself anyway. The ritual had rules. Robert had to be outside by 7:45. He had to be properly dressed. He had to have his coffee. And he had to wave with genuine enthusiasm, not just a lazy hand raise. These self-imposed standards gave his life structure. They were important. They mattered. On weekends, when fewer riders came through, Robert felt the loss acutely. Saturdays and Sundays stretched endlessly. He'd fill them with mundane tasks, grocery shopping, yard work, reruns of old television shows. But he was always just waiting for Monday morning, for 7:45, for the sound of engines and the opportunity to wave. His house was frozen in time. Margaret's reading glasses still sat on her nightstand. Her gardening gloves hung by the back door. Her recipes were still clipped to the refrigerator. Robert couldn't bring himself to change anything. Moving her things would feel like erasing her, admitting she was really gone. So he lived in a museum, dedicated to a life that had ended, waiting each day for those brief moments when he could pretend he still had a purpose, still had a place in the world of the living. The other neighbors had eventually stopped commenting on his morning routine. It had become just another quirk of Maple Street, like Mr. Chen's elaborate holiday decorations or the Ramirez family's 6 cats. Robert had become that old guy who waves at the bikers. It wasn't much of an identity, but it was something. What Robert didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that his simple gesture had been noticed by far more people than he imagined. What he couldn't know was that his life was about to change in ways he never could have predicted. And what he especially couldn't know was that Margaret, his wife of 47 years, the woman he thought he knew better than anyone, had been keeping a secret her entire married life. But all of that was still to come. For now, Robert Mitchell was content with his modest routine, his daily waves, and the small comfort of being acknowledged by strangers on motorcycles. It wasn't much, but for a lonely widower in a too-big house, it was everything. The woman in the red leather jacket had a name, though Robert didn't know it yet. Her name was Linda Vasquez, and she'd been riding motorcycles for 37 years. She was 62 years old, a former emergency room nurse who'd retired early after a back injury, made 12-hour shifts impossible. Riding was her therapy, her meditation, her way of processing 3 decades of trauma witnessed in hospital corridors. Linda had noticed Robert the very first time she'd taken Maple Street as her shortcut to the mountain roads. Something about the elderly man on the porch, waving with such genuine enthusiasm at perfect strangers, had struck her as both sad and beautiful. Most people her age had stopped engaging with the world that way. Most people, period, had stopped making eye contact with strangers, let alone waving at them. But this old man, every single morning like clockwork, stood on his porch and waved like he was greeting old friends. Linda had started honking back, then waving. Then, on impulse one morning, she'd given him that military salute, a gesture from her father who'd been a Marine. The smile that had lit up the old man's face had stayed with her all day. That evening, she'd done something she rarely did. She'd posted about it in her online motorcycle group. The group, called Mountain State Riders, had about 400 members from the tri-state area. It was mostly middle-aged and older riders, people who'd been in the motorcycle community for decades. Linda's post had been simple. There's this old guy on Maple Street who waves at us every single morning, rain or shine. Made me smile today. Anyone else notice him? The responses had surprised her. Dozens of riders replied yes, they'd seen him. Yes, they waved back. Some shared that seeing the waving man had become a highlight of their morning commute. Others joked about him being the unofficial mascot of their route. A few people, more perceptive than the rest, commented that he seemed lonely, that the waves probably meant more to him than any of them realized. One rider, a man named Carlos, had written something that stuck with Linda. My dad got like that after my mum died. He'd stand at the window and watch the world go by because he didn't know how to be part of it anymore. We should do something nice for the waving guy. The comment had planted a seed. But Linda wasn't sure what something nice would look like. So she just kept waving, kept honking, kept giving him that little moment of connection each morning. Meanwhile, Robert's relationship with his daughter Sarah was deteriorating. She'd come to visit in late October, her first trip in 6 months. Within hours of arriving, the tension was palpable. Sarah walked through the house with barely concealed distress, noting the dust on surfaces, the pile of unopened mail, her mother's things, still exactly where they'd been 3 years ago. That evening, she'd confronted him gently at first. They were sitting at the kitchen table, picking at the takeout Chinese food she'd insisted on ordering because Robert admitted he hadn't been cooking much. "Dad, I'm worried about you." Robert had tensed immediately. He knew that tone. "I'm fine, Sarah." "You're not fine. Look at this place. Mum's been gone for 3 years and you haven't moved a single one of her things. You're not eating properly. And Mrs. Patterson told me about your morning routine with the motorcycles." Robert felt his face flush with anger and embarrassment. Mrs. Patterson should mind her own business. "She's concerned, Dad. We all are. Standing outside every morning waving at strangers. Don't you see how that looks?" "How it looks?" Robert's voice rose. "How it looks to whom? The neighbors? You? I'm not hurting anyone. I'm not doing anything wrong." "I didn't say you were doing anything wrong. I just think maybe it's time to consider some changes. There are really nice retirement communities in North Carolina. You could be near me and the kids. There are activities, people your age, things to do." "Things to do," Robert repeated flatly. "You mean bingo and shuffleboard with other people waiting to die?" "That's not fair, Dad. What's not fair is you coming here and judging how I choose to live my life. What's not fair is you acting like I'm some kind of embarrassment because I wave at motorcycles." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I miss her too, you know. Mom was my mother. But you're living in a shrine. You're isolating yourself. This thing with the motorcycles, it's not healthy. It's not real connection, Dad. They're strangers. They don't care about you. They probably think you're crazy." The words hit Robert like a physical blow. "Get out! Dad! I said get out. Go back to North Carolina. Go back to your perfect life with your perfect family. I don't need your pity and I don't need your advice." Sarah had left the next morning, their goodbye stiff and awkward. She'd tried to apologize, to walk back her words, but Robert had been cold, distant. After she left, he'd sat in Margaret's favorite chair and cried for the first time in months. Not because Sarah was wrong, but because part of him feared she might be right. Were the bikers just humoring a pathetic old man? Did they laugh about him after they passed? Was he really just the crazy waving guy, a local oddity, a cautionary tale about what happens when grief breaks a person? That night, Robert had seriously considered stopping the whole routine, just staying inside, letting the motorcycles pass without acknowledgement, trying to find some other way to fill his days. But when 7:15 came the next morning, he found himself in the shower anyway, found himself making his coffee, found himself on the porch at 7:45. Because even if Sarah was right, even if the bikers did think he was crazy, those few minutes of waving were still the best part of his day, and if that made him pathetic, then so be it. At least he felt something. At least he was still trying. The woman in the red leather jacket had waved enthusiastically that morning. Robert had waved back, but his heart wasn't in it the way it usually was. Something had shifted. The joy had been tainted by doubt. Over the next few weeks, Robert found himself analyzing every interaction more critically. When riders didn't wave back, he wondered if they were deliberately ignoring him. When they did wave, he wondered if it was out of pity. The ritual that had sustained him was becoming a source of anxiety instead of comfort. His calls with David and Sarah became perfunctory. Yes, he was fine. No, he didn't need anything. Yes, he'd see them at Christmas. He could hear the worry in their voices, but he didn't know how to explain that he wasn't trying to worry them. He was just trying to survive each day. He was just trying to find a reason to keep getting up in the morning. The holidays approached with dread. Thanksgiving came and went. Robert declined both his children's invitations, claiming he had plans with neighbors, a lie that fooled no one. He spent Thanksgiving eating a frozen turkey dinner in front of the television, but he still got up at 7:45 that Friday morning to wave at the reduced number of riders taking the day off work. Linda had been one of them. She'd noticed that the old man's wave seemed less enthusiastic lately, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. It troubled her more than it probably should have. She posted about it again in the motorcycle group. Is it just me, or does the waving guy seem sad lately, like something's changed? The responses were immediate. Other riders had noticed too. Something was different. The consensus was that maybe he was sick, or maybe the holidays were hard for him. Someone suggested they should find out his name, maybe do something for him for Christmas. The idea gained traction quickly. Within days, a plan was forming, but they needed information. Who was he? What was his story? Was he alone? Did he have family? The group was hesitant to approach him directly, worried it might seem intrusive or weird. Instead, a few members started asking around the neighborhood, talking to shop owners on Maple Street, casually inquiring about the man who waved at bikers. Mrs. Patterson, ever the gossip, had been more than happy to share what she knew. His name was Robert Mitchell. His wife had died 3 years ago. His children lived out of state. He'd been a school principal. He was alone now, probably depressed, definitely lonely. The waving at motorcycles had started about 2 years ago and had become an obsession. The neighbors thought it was sad. His daughter had visited recently, and they'd had a terrible fight about it. Armed with this information, Linda and several core members of Mountain State Riders began researching. They found Robert's name in old newspaper articles about the high school where he'd worked. They found his wife's obituary online. Margaret Ann Mitchell died at age 68 after a brief illness. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother. And then, in the list of her survivors and preceded by, someone had included an unusual detail. Margaret was known in her younger years as a motorcycle enthusiast. That single line had sent Linda down a rabbit hole. She'd started digging deeper, searching old motorcycle club records, vintage racing archives, anything she could find about women in the motorcycle scene in the 1970s. And then she'd found it. Margaret Ann Sullivan, before she was Margaret Mitchell, had been known as Scarlet Rose. What Linda discovered would change everything. Margaret hadn't just been a motorcycle enthusiast, she'd been a legend. What do you think about the story so far? We'd love to hear your initial impressions in the comments. Does Robert's morning ritual resonate with you? Have you ever found comfort in small, simple routines during difficult times? Share your thoughts below and stay with us, because what's coming next will completely transform how you see this story. It was a Tuesday in early December when Robert's world collapsed. He'd followed his routine exactly as always. Shower at 7:15. Coffee at 7:30, position on the porch at 7:40. The weather was cold but clear, the kind of crisp winter morning that made the sound of motorcycle engines carry even further than usual. 7:45 came and went, no motorcycles. Robert waited. Sometimes they ran a few minutes late. Traffic lights, weather conditions, various factors could delay them. He sipped his coffee and watched the empty street. 8 o'clock. Still nothing. 8:15. The coffee had gone cold in his hands. The street remained silent, except for the occasional car, the sound of a dog barking somewhere in the distance. No motorcycles. Robert went inside, disturbed, but trying not to read too much into it. Maybe there was construction on the highway. Maybe there was an accident blocking the route. Maybe it was just a strange coincidence that none of the regular riders had come through. He tried to busy himself with tasks around the house, but he kept glancing at the clock, kept walking to the window to check the street. Wednesday morning, 7:45. Robert was on the porch early, anxious, needing to know that yesterday had been an anomaly. But the street remained silent, not a single motorcycle, not one. By Thursday, panic had set in. Something was terribly wrong. Had there been an accident? Had something happened to the riders? Or worse, had they finally decided to take a different route? Had his waving become so annoying, so pathetic, that the entire motorcycle community had collectively decided to avoid Maple Street? Robert found himself thinking about Sarah's words. They're strangers. They don't care about you. They probably think you're crazy. Had she been right all along? Had he been deluding himself? Had the bikers been laughing at him this whole time? And finally, mercifully, someone had suggested they take a different route to spare the crazy old man on Maple Street. Friday morning came. Robert almost didn't go outside. What was the point? They weren't coming back. Whatever brief connection he'd imagined having with them had been just that. Imagined. But years of routine are hard to break. At 7:44 he found himself outside anyway, coffee in hand, waiting, hoping, praying. Nothing. The silence was deafening. The street that had been filled with the thunder of engines, the soundtrack to his morning routine for nearly 3 years, was utterly quiet. It felt apocalyptic, like the world had ended and no one had bothered to tell him. Robert went inside and didn't come back out. He sat in Margaret's chair, staring at nothing, feeling the darkness he'd been holding at bay for 3 years finally swallow him whole. Without the morning ritual, without that 15-minute purpose, the days stretched into meaningless expanses of time. What was the point of showering, of getting dressed, of making coffee, of doing anything? He stopped answering his phone. When David called that weekend, Robert let it go to voicemail. He didn't have the energy to pretend he was okay. He wasn't okay. He'd never been okay. He'd just been barely holding on, and the one thing holding him together had disappeared. Saturday and Sunday passed in a fog. Robert barely ate. He didn't sleep well, waking up repeatedly throughout the night, checking the clock, counting the hours until Monday morning when surely the motorcycles would come back. This had to be some kind of holiday break. Maybe the riders had all taken time off. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation. Monday morning, Robert forced himself through the routine with desperate hope. Shower, coffee, porch, 7:45. Nothing. That's when something inside Robert broke completely. For the first time since Margaret's death, he felt suicidal thoughts creeping in. Not active plans, but passive wishes. Wishes that he could just go to sleep and not wake up. Wishes that his heart would simply stop. What was the point? His children barely tolerated him. His wife was gone. His career was over. And now even the strangers on motorcycles, the last thread connecting him to the feeling of being alive, had abandoned him. Tuesday morning, Robert made a decision. He couldn't just sit and wait anymore. He needed to know what had happened. He needed to understand why they'd stopped coming. Maybe one of them had been in an accident. Maybe there was a memorial service he should attend. Maybe, just maybe, there was a reasonable explanation that had nothing to do with him being pathetic. He got in his car for the first time in 2 weeks. He drove to the motorcycle shop on Henderson Avenue, a place he'd driven past hundreds of times but never entered. The bell above the door chimed as he walked in. A young man with heavily tattooed arms looked up from behind the counter. "Help you with something?" Robert felt immediately foolish. What was he going to say? "I'm looking for the people who used to drive past my house," but he'd come this far. "I'm looking for information about the riders who usually take Maple Street in the mornings. There's a woman. She rides a red Ducati, wears a red leather jacket. Do you know who I'm talking about?" The young man's expression shifted from friendly to wary. "Why are you looking for her?" I haven't seen any of the riders lately, and I was worried something might have happened. I live on Maple Street, and they used to come through every morning, but they stopped last week, and I just wanted to make sure everyone was okay." The explanation sounded insane, even to Robert's own ears. The young man was looking at him like he was a potential stalker. "I don't know who you're talking about, man. Lots of people ride Ducatis." Robert tried 2 more motorcycle shops with similar results. At the 3rd shop, an older man behind the counter had been more patient but equally unhelpful. "Look, buddy, I don't know about Maple Street or morning riders, but if they changed their route, they probably had a reason. Maybe there's construction. Maybe they found a better road. Riders are like water. They find the path of least resistance." By Tuesday afternoon, Robert was back home, feeling more defeated than ever. He'd made a fool of himself driving around the city interrogating motorcycle shop employees about a woman in a red jacket who probably didn't even know his name. Sarah had been right. He was pathetic. This whole thing was pathetic. That evening, sitting in the dark living room with the television playing unwatched, Robert looked at Margaret's photograph on the mantel. "I don't know how to do this without you," he whispered. "I don't know how to just keep living when everything feels pointless. The waving was stupid. I know it was stupid, but it was something. And now I don't even have that." The house was silent except for the murmur of the television. Robert thought about calling David or Sarah, admitting that they'd been right, that he needed help. But pride stopped him. He'd been so adamant that he was fine, that he could manage on his own. Admitting defeat now felt impossible. Wednesday morning, Robert didn't get up at 7:15. He stayed in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence. No motorcycles, no purpose, no point. Around 9, his phone rang. It was Sarah. Robert let it ring out. She called again. He ignored it. She sent a text. "Dad, please answer. I'm worried. Mrs. Patterson said she hasn't seen you outside all week. Please call me back." Mrs. Patterson, of course, always watching, always reporting. Robert felt a flash of anger, but it quickly faded into resignation. What did it matter? What did anything matter? Thursday passed the same way, then Friday. By Friday evening, Robert had received 6 calls from Sarah, 4 from David, and 3 texts from his grandson asking if he was okay. He'd responded to none of them. He knew he should. He knew he was worrying them, but he couldn't find the words to explain what he was feeling, couldn't find the energy to pretend he was anything other than defeated. That night, Robert sat in the dark, contemplating how he'd ended up here. 73 years old, alone, with a life so empty that the absence of strangers waving from motorcycles could send him spiraling into despair. When had he become this person? When had his world become so small? He thought about Margaret, about how vibrant she'd been, how full of life. She would have been horrified to see him like this. She would have told him to snap out of it, to find something to live for, to stop wallowing. But Margaret wasn't here. Margaret hadn't been here for 3 years, and Robert was tired of pretending he knew how to live without her. Saturday morning, December 14th. Robert woke up to the sound of engines, multiple engines, loud engines, right outside his house. At first, he thought he was dreaming or hallucinating, but the sound continued, growing louder. Robert stumbled out of bed, confused, disoriented. He walked to the front window and pulled back the curtain. His front yard was full of motorcycles. His street was lined with motorcycles. There had to be 20 of them, maybe more. And standing on his lawn, looking up at his house, were dozens of people in leather jackets and motorcycle gear. Robert's heart began to pound. What was happening? Was this some kind of joke, some kind of confrontation? Had he somehow offended them and they'd come to tell him off? Then someone knocked on his door, 3 firm knocks. Robert stood frozen, terrified, confused. The knock came again, more insistent. Slowly, with shaking hands, Robert walked to his front door. He hesitated for a long moment, hand on the doorknob. Then, not knowing what else to do, he opened it. Standing on his porch was the woman in the red leather jacket. "Thank you so much for staying with us this far. We know this story has been intense, emotional, and at times difficult to watch. But we promise you, the best is still to come. What happens next will exceed every expectation. The revelations that are about to unfold will leave you speechless. Please don't leave now. Keep watching. Trust us when we say the next 2 chapters contain twists and turns that will transform this entire story. You won't regret staying until the end." The woman in the red leather jacket was shorter than Robert had imagined. In person, without the motorcycle and the distance of the street between them, she looked less like the mysterious figure from his morning ritual and more like someone's mother or grandmother. She had kind eyes, crow's feet at the corners, grey streaks in her dark hair that was pulled back in a ponytail. She was smiling at him with such warmth that Robert felt immediately disarmed. "Mr. Mitchell," she said. "My name is Linda Vasquez. Can we talk to you for a few minutes?" Robert looked past her at the crowd gathered in his yard. 20 or more people, ranging in age from their 30s to their 70s, all watching him expectantly. Some were smiling, some looked emotional. All of them were waiting for his response. I don't understand," Robert managed. "What's going on? Did I do something wrong?" Linda's smile widened. "Wrong? No, Mr. Mitchell, you did something very, very right. Can we come in, or would you prefer to talk out here?" Robert glanced down at himself. He was still in his pajamas, unshaven, probably smelling after days of not showering. I'm not really presentable for company." "We don't care about that," Linda said gently, "but if you'd like a few minutes to get ready, we can wait. We've got time. We've got all the time in the world." Robert nodded numbly. "Give me 10 minutes. He closed the door and stood in his hallway, heart racing, mind spinning. What was happening? Why were they here? 10 minutes wasn't enough to make sense of any of this, but it was enough to make himself look more human. He rushed to the bathroom, showered quickly, shaved with trembling hands, and pulled on clean clothes for the first time in days. When he opened the door again, Linda was still there, waiting patiently. Behind her, the crowd had organized itself into a semicircle on his lawn, like they were preparing for some kind of ceremony. The morning sun lit up the chrome and paint of the motorcycles lining his street, creating a spectacular, surreal scene. "Better?" Robert asked, still confused, but trying to maintain some dignity. "You look great," Linda assured him. "Mr. Mitchell, I want to start by apologizing. We stopped coming down your street last week, and we didn't think about how that might affect you. We didn't realize until afterward that our absence might worry you or upset you. That wasn't our intention at all. I don't understand. Why did you stop? And why are you here now? Linda took a breath. About 6 months ago, I posted in our motorcycle group online about you, about the man who waves at us every morning from his porch. I thought it was sweet, and I wasn't the only one. Turns out dozens of us had noticed you. Dozens of us looked forward to your wave. It became a thing in our community. You became a thing, in the best possible way. Robert felt his face flush. I didn't mean to be a thing. I was just waving. We know. And that's what made it special. You weren't looking for anything from us. You were just being kind, being present. But the more we talked about you in the group, the more curious people became. Who were you? Why did you wave? Some people thought maybe you were lonely. Others thought maybe you just loved motorcycles. We wanted to know your story. So you investigated me? Robert felt a flicker of anger. That's why you stopped coming, to dig into my life. Please don't be upset, Linda said quickly. We weren't trying to invade your privacy. We just asked around the neighborhood a little. Your neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, she told us about your wife, about Margaret, about how you've been alone since she passed. We wanted to do something nice for you, maybe bring you some food for the holidays or invite you to one of our group rides as a passenger. Just something to show you that your waves meant something to us. Robert felt tears prickling at his eyes. You stopped coming for a week to plan something nice. We stopped coming because we needed time to research and organize. But I swear, Mr. Mitchell, we didn't think about how our absence might affect you. One of the shop owners we talked to mentioned that you'd come in asking about us, worried something had happened. That's when we realized we'd made a mistake. We should have explained what we were doing. We should have contacted you directly. I thought, Robert's voice cracked, I thought you'd all decided I was pathetic, that you'd all decided to take a different route to avoid the crazy old man. Oh, Mr. Mitchell, Linda's eyes filled with tears. No, never. You made our mornings better every single day. You gave us something to look forward to. You reminded us that there's still kindness in the world, still connection. We weren't avoiding you. We were trying to honor you. Robert wiped at his eyes, embarrassed by his emotion but unable to stop it. You said you found out about Margaret? Linda nodded. We did. And Mr. Mitchell, we found out something else. Something I don't think you know. Can I show you something? She turned and gestured to someone in the crowd. A man in his 60s stepped forward carrying a cardboard box. He brought it to the porch and set it down carefully. Open it, Linda said softly. With shaking hands, Robert lifted the lid of the box. Inside were photographs, old photographs, some in color but faded, others in black and white. Robert pulled out the top photo and his breath caught. It was Margaret, but not the Margaret he'd known. This Margaret was young, maybe 19 or 20. She was standing next to a motorcycle, wearing jeans and a leather jacket, her hair wild and long. She was grinning at the camera with a confidence and joy that Robert had never seen in any of their wedding photos or family pictures. What is this? He whispered. Linda knelt beside him. Your wife, Margaret, before she was Margaret Mitchell, before she met you. She was Margaret Sullivan, and in the motorcycle racing community of the 1970s, she was known as Scarlet Rose. Robert pulled out another photo. Margaret on a motorcycle, mid-race, leaning into a turn. Another photo of Margaret on a podium, holding a trophy, surrounded by men who were all looking at her with respect and admiration. Another of her working on an engine, tools in hand, grease on her face, smiling. I don't understand, Robert said, his voice barely above a whisper. Margaret never mentioned any of this, not once in 47 years. She never talked about motorcycles. She never wanted to ride. When I suggested we rent bikes on vacation once, she said she had no interest. How is this possible? Linda pulled out another photo. This one showed Margaret standing with a group of other riders. In the center of the group was a banner, Mid-Atlantic Women's Racing Championship 1974. First place, Margaret Scarlett Rose Sullivan. She was a champion, Linda said, multiple times. She raced from 1972 to 1976. She was one of the only women competing at that level at that time. She was fast, fearless, and according to everyone we've talked to who knew her back then, she was destined for greatness in the sport. Then why did she stop? Robert demanded. Why did she never tell me? An older man stepped forward from the crowd. He had a long grey beard and wore a leather vest covered in patches. Because of what happened in '76, he said. I knew Scarlett Rose. I raced against her. She was incredible. But there was an accident. A bad one. Her best friend, a woman named Diane Carter, died in a crash at a race in Pennsylvania. Scarlett Rose was right behind her when it happened. She saw the whole thing. Robert felt like the ground was shifting beneath him. I never knew about any of this. After Diane died, the man continued, Scarlett Rose withdrew completely. She sold her bike, left the racing community, and from what we heard, she never rode again. Some people said she blamed herself, even though the accident wasn't her fault. Others said she just couldn't handle the loss. Either way, she disappeared. We lost track of her. Until now, I didn't even know she'd gotten married or what had happened to her life. Robert looked back at the photos spread across his porch. In every single one, Margaret looked alive in a way he'd never seen. Vibrant, powerful, free. It was like looking at a stranger who happened to have his wife's face. Why wouldn't she tell me? Robert asked, more to himself than to anyone else. 47 years. We told each other everything, or I thought we did. Linda placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Grief makes people do strange things, Mr. Mitchell. Maybe she couldn't talk about it because it hurt too much. Maybe she thought if she never mentioned that part of her life, she could pretend it never happened. Maybe she was trying to protect herself from the pain of remembering what she'd lost. Or maybe, the bearded man added, she was trying to protect you. Some people bury their past because they think it defines them in ways they don't want to be defined. Maybe she wanted you to know her as Margaret the teacher, Margaret the wife, Margaret the mother. Not Scarlett Rose the racer, not the woman who watched her best friend die. Robert sat down on his porch step, overwhelmed. The box of photos sat open beside him, revealing an entire hidden life, an entire hidden person he'd been married to for nearly 5 decades without knowing existed. There's more, Linda said quietly. May I sit? Robert nodded, and Linda sat beside him on the step. The crowd in the yard had gone silent, watching respectfully. When we found out about Scarlett Rose, Linda continued, I posted about it in our group. The response was incredible. See, Mr. Mitchell, Scarlett Rose was a legend. She inspired a whole generation of women to get into motorcycle racing. Even after she disappeared, people still talked about her, still told stories about her races, her skill, her courage. She was a pioneer. And when people in the broader motorcycle community found out that Scarlett Rose had died and that her husband had been waving at riders every morning, not even knowing his wife's history, well, it touched people. Really touched them. Robert looked up. What do you mean? Linda pulled out her phone and opened a video. I posted a short video about you 3 days ago. Just a 30-second clip talking about the waving man and his connection to Scarlett Rose. Mr. Mitchell, it's been viewed over 2 million times. People from all over the country, all over the world, have been commenting, sharing their own stories about loss, about hidden grief, about the secret lives people lead. Your morning waves, combined with Margaret's story, it resonated with people in ways none of us expected. She showed him the phone. Robert watched the video, stunned. Comments scrolled by too fast to read, but he caught glimpses. This made me cry. Beautiful story. I'm waving at strangers tomorrow. Scarlet Rose was my hero. We stopped coming down your street, Linda said, because we were organizing something. We needed time to contact old members of the racing community, to gather photos and stories, to plan, and we needed time to set up a fundraiser. A fundraiser? Robert repeated, confused. Linda nodded. The video went viral, and when it did, people started asking how they could help, how they could do something to honor Scarlet Rose and support you. So we set up a fundraising campaign. We thought maybe we'd raise a few $1,000s to help you with expenses, or to create a small memorial for Margaret. She paused, her eyes shining with emotion. Mr. Mitchell, in 3 days, the motorcycle community has raised $473,000. Robert stared at her. That's not possible. It is possible, and it happened. Because people were moved by your story and by Margaret's legacy. But here's the thing, we don't want to just give you money. We want to do something meaningful with it, something that honors both of you, something that helps other people who are lonely, who are grieving, who need connection. The bearded man stepped forward again. We want to create a community center, a place where seniors can gather, where the motorcycle community can meet, where people can find connection. We want to call it the Scarlet Rose Community Center, and we want you to be the director. Robert felt dizzy. I don't know anything about running a community center. You were a school principal for 30 years, Linda pointed out. You managed budgets, staff, programs. You absolutely know how to do this, and you wouldn't be doing it alone. We'd all be involved. The entire Mountain State Riders group wants to participate. We'd handle fundraising, events, volunteer coordination, but we need someone at the center of it. Someone who understands what it means to be lonely. Someone who understands the power of small gestures and daily rituals. Someone who knows how important connection is. Your wife inspired a generation of women, the bearded man said. Now you've inspired us. The way you kept showing up every morning, the way you kept waving even when you probably felt invisible, that's what community is built on. Consistent, genuine, human connection. You've been demonstrating that for 3 years. We're just asking you to keep doing it on a bigger scale. Robert looked at the crowd gathered in his yard. All these people, strangers a week ago, now looking at him with respect, with affection, with hope. He looked at the photos of Margaret, his wife who wasn't just his wife, but was also Scarlet Rose, a woman he'd never fully known. I need to think, Robert said. This is all too much. I need time to process. Of course, Linda said immediately. Take all the time you need. But before we go, there's one more thing. Your children are here. What? Linda gestured to the edge of the crowd. 2 figures stepped forward and Robert's heart clenched. Sarah and David. His daughter and son, who were supposed to be in North Carolina and Seattle, were standing in his front yard. Sarah was crying. David looked stunned. They approached the porch slowly, uncertainly. Dad, Sarah said, her voice breaking. Linda contacted us. Told us what was happening. We flew in last night. We saw the video. We read the comments. We had no idea about any of this. About Mom's past. About how much the waving meant to you. About any of it. David nodded, clearly struggling with his emotions. I'm so sorry, Dad. We thought you were just being eccentric. We didn't understand. We didn't realize you were fighting so hard just to keep going every day. Robert stood up slowly. His children, the ones he'd been avoiding, the ones he'd pushed away, were here. You came all this way. Of course we came, Sarah said. You're our father, and we've been terrible children. We've been so focused on our own lives that we completely failed to see what you needed. We're sorry. We're so sorry." Robert couldn't hold back anymore. He stepped forward and pulled both his children into an embrace, something he hadn't done since Margaret's funeral. They held each other, crying openly, while the crowd of bikers watched with respectful silence. "I miss her so much," Robert sobbed. "Every single day. And I didn't know how to tell you, because I thought I was supposed to be strong. I thought I was supposed to move on. But I couldn't. I still can't." "You don't have to move on," David said fiercely. "You just have to keep living, and we're going to help you. We're going to be better. We're going to actually be here for you. And we're going to learn about Mom," Sarah added. "Really learn about her, all the parts of her, not just the parts we knew." Linda stood up, giving the family space. "Mr. Mitchell, we're going to head out now. Give you time with your kids. But before we go, I want to extend an invitation. Tomorrow morning we're doing a memorial ride. We're going to ride to Clarkson Memorial Park, where there's a wall dedicated to racers who've passed away. Margaret's name, her real name, Scarlet Rose, is engraved there. It has been since she disappeared in '76. Everyone assumed she'd died because she vanished so completely. But now we know she just chose a different life." She pulled a small envelope from her jacket pocket and handed it to Robert. "These are the details. We'd be honored if you'd come with us. You can ride in the sidecar of my bike if you're willing. Your kids are welcome to come too. We have passenger spots available." Robert took the envelope with shaking hands. "I've never ridden a motorcycle." Linda smiled. "Then it's about time you started. Margaret would want you to experience what she loved. Even if she never told you about it, I think somewhere deep down, she'd want you to understand." The crowd began to disperse slowly, riders returning to their bikes. But before they left, each one approached Robert. Some shook his hand, others hugged him. Many told him stories about how his waves had brightened their mornings, how his consistency had meant something to them. An older woman told him she'd been going through a divorce, and his cheerful waves had been the only positive thing in her mornings for months. A younger man said seeing Robert reminded him to call his own father more often. Robert stood on his porch, surrounded by his children, watching as 20 motorcycles started up and pulled away from his house. At the end of the street, they all honked, a long, loud chorus of motorcycle horns. Robert raised his hand and waved, tears streaming down his face. When the sound of the engines faded, Sarah turned to her father. "Are you going to do it? The community center?" Robert looked at the box of photos, at the images of Margaret he'd never known existed. "I think I have to. I think she'd want me to, and I think I want to. For the first time in 3 years, I have something to look forward to, something bigger than just getting through each day." David squeezed his father's shoulder. "We're proud of you, Dad, and I think Mom would be too." That evening, Sarah and David insisted on staying with Robert. They ordered pizza, sat around the kitchen table, and went through all the photos Linda had left behind. They found images of their mother they'd never imagined existed. Margaret on racetracks, Margaret covered in grease and smiling, Margaret young and wild and free. "She never told us any of this," Sarah marveled. "Not even a hint." "She was protecting herself," Robert said quietly, finally understanding. After her friend died, racing stopped being joy and became trauma. She built a new life, a safe life, where she didn't have to think about speed or risk or loss. She became a teacher, a wife, a mother. She chose stability. "Do you think she missed it?" David asked. Robert thought about that. He thought about Margaret, about 47 years of marriage, about the woman he'd thought he knew completely. "I think part of her probably missed it every day, but I also think she chose us consciously. She chose a different kind of happiness. Maybe not as thrilling, maybe not as intense, but real nonetheless. She loved teaching. She loved being a mother. She loved our life together. It wasn't the life she'd planned when she was Scarlet Rose, but it was still a good life. "Are you angry she never told you?" Sarah asked. Robert considered the question carefully. "No. I'm sad. I wish I'd known. I wish we could have talked about it, but I understand why she couldn't. Some pain is too deep to speak about. Some losses are too profound to revisit. She carried that grief alone for 47 years, so it wouldn't infect our life together. That's not dishonesty, that's sacrifice." They stayed up late into the night, talking more honestly than they had in years, about Margaret, about grief, about loneliness, about the ways they'd all failed each other and the ways they could do better going forward. It wasn't a complete healing. Decades of distance couldn't be fixed in one night, but it was a beginning. Sunday morning dawned clear and cold. Robert woke up in his own bed for the first time in a week, without the crushing sense of dread that had accompanied every other morning. Sarah and David were asleep in the guest rooms. The house felt less empty than it had in 3 years. By 9 in the morning, the motorcycles began arriving. Not just the 20 from yesterday, but dozens more. Riders from all over the state, some from neighboring states, had come for the memorial ride. They lined up along Maple Street, a procession of chrome and leather and roaring engines that stretched for blocks. Linda arrived at 9:30, pulling up on her red Ducati, but today, attached to the bike was a sidecar, a sleek, matching red sidecar with comfortable padding and a windscreen. "Your chariot awaits," she said with a grin. Robert stared at it nervously. "I'm 73 years old. Is this safe?" "Completely safe. I've been riding for 37 years without a major accident. You're in good hands. Plus, you'll be strapped in securely. The only risk is that you might actually enjoy yourself." Sarah and David emerged from the house, both looking uncertain but excited. They'd been matched with experienced riders who had passenger seats. David was riding with the bearded man, whose name turned out to be Frank. Sarah was riding with a woman named Carmen, who'd known Scarlet Rose back in the 70s. "Last chance to back out," Linda said to Robert. "No judgment if you're not comfortable." Robert looked at his children, looked at the dozens of riders gathered to honor his wife, looked at the sidecar that represented everything Margaret had loved and everything she'd given up. "I'm not backing out. Let's do this." Getting into the sidecar was awkward and took some assistance, but once Robert was settled and strapped in, he felt surprisingly secure. Linda handed him a helmet, red, to match her jacket and the bike. "Can you hear me?" Linda's voice came through a speaker in the helmet. "I can hear you," Robert confirmed, startled. "Good, we've got communication. I'll narrate as we ride, tell you what we're seeing, what to expect. If at any point you're uncomfortable, just say the word and we'll pull over. Okay? Okay." The engine rumbled to life beneath him, and Robert felt the vibration through his entire body. It was powerful, almost frightening, but also exhilarating. Linda pulled out slowly, and the entire procession followed. 20 motorcycles, 30, 40, Robert lost count. All riding together in formation, all here because of him and Margaret. As they left the residential streets and hit the highway, Linda accelerated. The wind whipped past the windscreen. The engine roared. The world blurred into motion and speed and sound, and Robert, for the first time since Margaret died, felt something other than grief. He felt alive. "This is what she loved," Linda shouted over the wind. "This feeling, this freedom. Can you feel it?" Robert could feel it. He understood it. Why Margaret had raced. Why she'd chased this sensation. Why giving it up must have cost her something profound. The speed wasn't reckless. It was liberating. The risk wasn't foolish. It was vital. This was what it meant to be fully present in your body, fully aware of being alive. They rode for 2 hours, climbing into the mountains, following winding roads that offered spectacular views of valleys and forests. Other bikers waved as they passed, honking in recognition of the massive group. At rest stops, people took photos. Some riders came up to Robert to shake his hand, to tell him about what Scarlet Rose had meant to them or their mothers or sisters who'd been inspired by her legacy. Finally, they arrived at Clarkson Memorial Park. It was a beautiful spot, a hillside overlooking a valley, with a granite wall inscribed with names. The Wall of Remembrance, honoring motorcycle racers who died or disappeared. The group parked in a massive lot and walked together to the wall. Robert moved slowly, supported by David on one side and Sarah on the other, his legs stiff from the ride, but his spirits soaring. And there it was, carved into granite, Margaret, Scarlet Rose Sullivan, 1948-1976, champion racer, trailblazer, forever missed. The dates were wrong, of course. She hadn't died in 1976. She'd just stopped being Scarlet Rose and become Margaret Mitchell. But seeing her name there, seeing her honored and remembered, brought tears to Robert's eyes. "She was here all along," he whispered. "Part of her never left." Sarah was crying openly. "We should have known. She should have told us." Carmen, the woman who'd given Sarah a ride, stepped forward. "Your mother was my hero. I started racing because of her. When she disappeared, it broke my heart. But I kept racing because she'd shown me it was possible. Dozens of women did. She changed the sport just by being in it, just by refusing to quit when men told her she didn't belong. Even after she left, her impact continued. That's a legacy, honey. That's immortality." Frank, the bearded rider, pulled out a bottle of whiskey. "We'd like to do a toast, if you're willing." He poured small amounts into paper cups that had been brought for the occasion. He handed them out to Robert, Sarah, David, and the core group of riders who'd gathered around the wall. "To Scarlet Rose," Frank said, raising his cup, "who showed us that women could ride as hard, as fast, and as fearlessly as any man, who inspired generations, who lived 2 complete lives, one in speed and one in peace. May her memory be a blessing and a challenge to all of us to live fully, whatever that means." "To Scarlet Rose," the group echoed. They drank. Then, one by one, riders approached the wall and touched Margaret's name. Some left flowers, others left small tokens, patches from their jackets, pins, photos. It became a spontaneous memorial, a tribute from a community that had never forgotten her. Robert stood there for a long time, his hand pressed against the granite, feeling the carved letters of his wife's name. Sarah and David stood on either side of him, and for the first time in 3 years, Robert felt like they were truly a family again. United in grief, yes, but also united in discovery, in understanding, in love. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the valley, Linda approached Robert again. "There's one more thing. The fundraiser we told you about, it's grown. As of this morning, it's at $612,000. News stations have picked up the story. National outlets are calling. Your morning waves, combined with Margaret's legacy, it's touched something in people. They want to help. They want to be part of this." Robert shook his head in disbelief. "I don't deserve this." "It's not about deserving," Linda said gently. "It's about need. There are thousands of people out there just like you were a week ago. Lonely, isolated, searching for connection. The Scarlet Rose Community Center could serve all of them. It could be a place where the motorcycle community and the senior community intersect, where people gather for rides, for meals, for friendship, where grief is acknowledged and connection is celebrated. You could build something Margaret would be proud of. Something that honors both her lives, the one as Scarlet Rose and the one as your wife." Robert looked at his children. "What do you think?" "I think you should do it," Sarah said immediately. "I think it's exactly what you need, what we all need." David nodded. "And we'll help. We can't be here every day, but we can be more present. We can video chat regularly. We can visit more often. You won't be doing this alone, Dad." Robert turned back to the wall, to Margaret's name carved in stone. He thought about her life, both lives, all the things she'd been and all the things she'd chosen to become. He thought about his morning waves, about how a simple gesture had spiraled into something he never could have imagined. He thought about community, about connection, about the ways humans need each other, even when they pretend they don't. "Okay," he said finally. "Let's build something beautiful. Let's make sure no one has to feel as alone as I felt. Let's create a place where Scarlett Rose and Margaret Mitchell can both be honored, where speed and safety can coexist, where the young can learn from the old, and the old can be inspired by the young." The riders cheered. Someone started chanting, "Scarlett Rose, Scarlett Rose," and soon the entire group joined in, their voices echoing across the valley. As they prepared to ride back, Robert noticed a young woman standing off to the side, watching nervously. She was maybe 19 or 20, wearing a new-looking leather jacket that didn't quite fit right. Linda noticed her too and walked over. "Can we help you?" The young woman nodded shyly. "I saw the video about Scarlett Rose and the waving man. I've been wanting to learn to ride, but I've been too scared. My mum says motorcycles are too dangerous, that women shouldn't race. But seeing this, seeing all of you honoring a woman who raced 50 years ago, seeing how much it meant to everyone, it made me brave. I bought my first bike yesterday. I don't really know anyone in the motorcycle community yet. I was hoping maybe I could learn about Scarlett Rose, maybe learn to be brave like her." Linda smiled and turned to Robert. "What do you think, Mr. Mitchell? Should we teach her about Scarlett Rose?" Robert looked at the young woman, at her nervous hope, at her desire to be part of something bigger than herself. He thought about Margaret, about how she'd inspired women decades ago and was still inspiring them now. He thought about legacy, about how the things we do ripple forward through time in ways we can never predict. "I think Scarlett Rose would tell you that bravery isn't the absence of fear," Robert said. "It's doing the thing that scares you anyway. She raced even though it was dangerous. She continued even when men told her she didn't belong. And then, when racing became too painful, she was brave enough to walk away and build a completely different life. Both choices took courage." He paused, then smiled at the young woman. "Come to the community center when we open it. We'll have riding lessons, safety courses, mentorship programs. You'll learn to ride and you'll learn about Scarlett Rose, and maybe one day you'll inspire someone else the way Margaret inspired all of us." The young woman's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. Thank you so much." As the sun finally set and the group prepared for the ride home, Robert climbed back into the sidecar. He was exhausted, emotionally drained, but more at peace than he'd been in years. As Linda fired up the engine, Robert looked back one last time at the wall, at his wife's name shining in the last rays of sunlight. "Goodbye, Scarlett Rose," he whispered. "Thank you for everything you were, everything you sacrificed, everything you taught me, even after you were gone." The ride home was quieter, more contemplative. The motorcycles cruised through the darkening landscape, their headlights cutting through the gathering night. Robert felt the rumble of the engine, the cool night air on his face, the sense of movement and purpose. When they finally pulled onto Maple Street, Robert saw that his neighbors had come out to watch. Mrs. Patterson stood on her lawn, actually smiling and waving. The Johnsons had made a sign, "Welcome home, Robert." The Ramirez family held up their phones, recording the procession. As Linda pulled up to Robert's house and helped him out of the sidecar, his legs shaky but his heart full, the entire neighborhood applauded. It wasn't just about the motorcycles anymore. It was about community. It was about how isolation can be transformed into connection. It was about second chances and hidden lives and the ways we honor those we've lost by continuing to live fully ourselves. Sarah and David pulled up moments later, both exhilarated from their rides. They gathered on the porch with Robert, and together they watched as the motorcycles dispersed, riders heading to their own homes, their own lives, but all connected now by something bigger than themselves. "Dad," Sarah said quietly, "I'm sorry I didn't understand before. I'm sorry I tried to make you stop waving. I see now what it meant, what it became." "You couldn't have known," Robert said. "I didn't even know. That's the beautiful thing about life. Sometimes the smallest actions lead to the biggest transformations. I was just trying to survive each day. I had no idea I was building something." David put his arm around his father. "When does the work start on the community center?" "Linda said we can break ground in the spring. There's a lot of planning to do first. Permits, designs, staffing, programming. It'll take time." "That's okay," Sarah said. "You've got time, and you've got help, and you've got a purpose again." Robert looked up at the night sky, at the stars emerging one by one. He thought about Margaret, about both versions of her, and he hoped that wherever she was proud. Proud that her secret had been revealed. Proud that her legacy was continuing. Proud that the man she'd chosen to spend her life with was finally finding his way back to living instead of just existing. The next morning, Monday, Robert woke up at 7:15. He showered, dressed, and made his coffee. At 7:40, he stepped out onto his porch. Sarah and David were still asleep inside. The street was quiet. 7:45 came, and right on schedule, the first motorcycle rumbled down Maple Street. It was Linda on her red Ducati. She waved enthusiastically. Robert waved back, grinning. Behind her came Frank on his Harley, then Carmen, then a dozen others. The morning ritual had resumed, but it was different now. It wasn't a one-sided gesture from a lonely man hoping for acknowledgement. It was a mutual exchange between friends, between a community that had formed around shared respect and unexpected connection. As the motorcycles passed, honking and waving, Robert stood on his porch and felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. He felt joy, pure, uncomplicated joy. And somewhere, he liked to imagine, Scarlet Rose was riding too, free and fast and finally at peace, knowing that her two lives had merged at last, that her legacy would continue, and that the man she'd loved had found his way back to living. The Scarlet Rose Community Center opened 18 months later. It became everything they'd hoped for and more, a place where seniors gathered for meals and activities, where motorcycle safety courses were taught, where young riders learned from experienced ones, where the lonely found friends, where the grieving found understanding, where life was celebrated in all its messy, complicated, beautiful forms. And every morning, without fail, Robert Mitchell stood outside the center at 7:45 and waved at the motorcycles passing by. Because some rituals are worth keeping, some connections are worth honoring, and some simple gestures change the world in ways we can never predict. This is the story of how one man's daily wave transformed loneliness into community, revealed hidden truths about the woman he loved, and created a legacy that will touch lives for generations to come. This is the story of Robert Mitchell and Margaret Scarlet Rose Sullivan. This is the story of how the smallest acts of human connection can ripple forward through time, creating waves far bigger than we ever imagined possible. This remarkable story reminds us that we never truly know everything about the people we love most. It shows us that grief can be transformed into purpose, that loneliness can become community, and that it's never too late for life to surprise us with unexpected joy. Margaret lived 2 complete lives, one as Scarlet Rose, the fearless racer who inspired generations, and one as the devoted wife and teacher who chose peace over speed. Both lives were authentic, both lives mattered, and both lives continue to inspire. Robert's simple morning waves weren't just about acknowledging strangers on motorcycles. They were about refusing to disappear into grief, about maintaining connection to the world even when that world felt empty and meaningless. His persistence, his daily commitment to that small ritual ended up touching thousands of lives in ways he never could have imagined. What's your take on this incredible journey? Have you ever discovered something unexpected about a loved one after they passed? Have you found meaning in small daily rituals during difficult times? Do you believe in the power of simple gestures to create profound change? We want to hear your stories, your thoughts, your reflections. Share them in the comments below. If this story moved you, if it made you think differently about connection and legacy and the hidden depths in people we think we know completely, please subscribe to our channel. Hit that notification bell so you never miss another story that will challenge the way you see the world. And please, don't leave yet. Click on the next recommended video to discover another unbelievable true story that will restore your faith in the power of human connection and the resilience of the human spirit. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring about Robert and Margaret's story. Thank you for being part of this community. Until next time, remember, the smallest gestures matter more than you know. The people you love may have depths you've never discovered. And it's never, ever too late for life to surprise you with something beautiful.